Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. On today's show, we're going to talk about title insurance. And we have with us as our guest today, Doug Hill from HMH Law Offices in Barrie, on Owen Street in Barrie, downtown Barrie. And I just throw it over to you right away and ask you, what is the value of title insurance? Because a lot of us are a little confused about it.
Well, that's one of the all-encompassing questions. The value of it, really the value of it is a protection device. Hopefully you'll never have to use it. It's little understood. It's omnipresent now. It's required basically in our profession, but people don't really understand it.
Perfect. Well, so let's get some perspective on it. And you've been practicing since '81, if I understand correctly.
That's
so
correct.
You've seen both sides of pre and post introduction of title insurance. Maybe you can give us an idea of what was all encompassing, or what was the practice of assuring title was protected pre-title insurance?
Great question. When I started, the lawyer or the conveyancer would have to go to the registry office, have you search, you're buying this property. You have to pull out the old books where they would record all of the registrations and mortgaging and taxes and death deeds, et cetera, that had occurred. Trace back the history 40 years, but the search documents we had to complete had 55 different entries that you had to do on each one of them. And that includes pulling out all of the actual hard copy of the old documents, getting them out of the numbered system and putting them back in. So it was a lengthy, arduous process, and all that really did was tell you where the problems were.
So it was a long, arduous process where someone would have to get in their car, walk, get in the bus, whatever, go over to the registry office
in each county
and go through the manual paper archive.
For 40-year history of the property, yes.
Versus today, everything is online, so maybe how does the process unfold today?
Well, about 2006, the long history, the registry office went electronic. All the documentation was registered. Each property was given what's called a property identification number, or a PIN, and that's all we really need to deal with properties now. But everything was put onto a government-owned computer system that has now partnered, but it still is active. Lawyers, and there are people who work for lawyers who have a special code that can get them into the system, can search any title in Ontario from their desktop. They can print out copies of all of these documents. But remember as well, though, there was a changeover from the Register Act to the Land Titles Act that was completed in about 2004, 2006. All new subdivisions had to be in land titles, which is a government certified title system. You only have to go to the last registered deed. You don't have to go back 40 years. So that's the much more prevalent way of looking. Almost all are land titles now.
Let's back up just for one quick second. We've mentioned the word title about 10 times so far. And what is title, and why is it important that you do this function? Or why is it important that we have this protection?
What are the protections?
Yeah.
Okay, then let me go back a little bit. When Ontario got divided up, or especially Simcoe County got divided up into concession lots and deeded off from the government, we had the best system of registry in the world. We could check to see who owned it. We could check the boundaries and descriptions to make sure there was no overlap or no miscommunication in any way. Lawyers were held to the standard of perfection. If we made a mistake, we were sued and we would lose, because you have to certify that this is the house that somebody owns, this is the boundaries of their property. Yes, the fence is on the right line, or no, it's not. Yes, it's too close to a property line, or no, it isn't. It's the right address, it has the right access, you can get to it, you can get out to the roads from it. That's all the things we were required to do. We still are, but it's a lot more simple now. Lousy English, I'm sorry, but because we can just go online and look at what the last government registration was. We still have to check all of the things that go with it, like to make sure that there's no old mortgaging on title that wasn't discharged, or somebody didn't put a claim for lien on, or somebody didn't sign off a spousal interest. That gets into the familial aspect, because you might have title in your name only, but if you're married, your wife probably has an interest in that property too if you lived in it. And if her name isn't on title, we still have to make sure she's signed off somewhere.
And protected.
And protected. So the bottom line is, when you buy a house, when we certify title to you, you have complete confidence that you own what you think you own. And you can mortgage it, you can deal with it however you want to.
And I think that's really one side of the transaction, but I mean, I guess again, if you were to go back 30, 40 years, we might not have had access to GPS and satellite imaging the way we do today. So you were reliant on somebody doing meets and bounds, like essentially taking a chain and saying,
Rods and chains.
from
Rods and
the
chains,
big
gotcha.
stone
When
to
I
the
started-
apple tree.
And there was a lot of that and when we first started looking, from the X on the stone to the water line. Of course, the water line's gone up and down 10 feet now,
Yeah.
over to the boathouse and back to the highway, sort of idea.
Yeah.
Right, so that was as accurate as it got.
But, yes, but
Now-
we still had to confirm that.
Now, we are under the assumption that, as buyers, that we have a choice on whether or not we take title insurance or not. Maybe clarify that.
Again, when title insurance first came in, I fought hard against it. I had the vice presidents of most of the companies in my office, because we're luckily pretty high volume, convincing me that we should have it. And I said, why? Why should I be an insurance salesman? I'm certifying title. But the reason it came in is because, as I said, we had to do off-title searching for taxes, for zoning, for building, for outstanding permits, for all the old spousal issues, et cetera, et cetera. That takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it usually meant you needed at least a month before you could close a deal. Title insurance came to us and said, well, why are you doing this? Only a very, very small percentage has any difficulty with them. So why don't you just let us insure over it? So you don't know whether there's an outstanding building permit or a work order or taxes aren't paid, but we honestly don't care because title insurance covers it.
So it's an insurance product, really is what it is.
Exactly what it is.
And it's a numbers game. So, of the 1,000 transactions that take place in a day, maybe 1, 2, maybe 10, maybe 20 will have an actual challenge with them. The insurer has collected all sorts of premiums and they're going to pay out based on numbers.
That's
right?
one of the things we're going to talk about later.
Good.
Because there's
Let's do
an
that
issue
later.
with that too.
But let's
there you
talk
go.
about this then for 1 second. Who
Okay.
does it actually protect? For all of our viewers here, I can't tell you how many thousand transactions I've done and how many transactions you've done over your career, but I can tell you that for the most part, none of my clients in 15 years have ever asked me, why do I need this or what does it do for me? They look at it as a line item on their legal bill that they have to pay, that they don't really have a choice. They don't really ask the question. I've always made sure I tell them what they're paying for, but who's it actually protecting? And can you talk about the difference between the lender side of the policy versus the homeowner side of the policy that's optional as well?
Well, again, title insurance is optional. We're required to explain it to each client. They can get a lawyer to certify title and pay all of the cost of that, which would be expensive in today's world. Or they can use title insurance, which is actually a very low premium that protects the owner of the property for as long as they own it. They only
And
pay it
that's a
once. They
one-time
only pay it once
upfront
only
payment.
upfront, and it's a low amount. Like,
Yeah.
you're paying, let's say, somewhere around $255 for a 3-bedroom bungalow, normal $400,000 purchase, and something went drastically wrong that cost 70 or 80 grand to fix. They have to do it.
Yeah.
And you paid only that one premium. The other policy is the lender's policy, and that's the one that's much more prevalent, which is why people don't really get a choice anymore. Because if you put a mortgage on a property, almost every lender requires a title insurance of one sort. They don't dictate which one, but they require title insurance because the coverages are all pretty much the same. The reason for that is they don't want to know whether there was outstanding building permits or tax issues or anything like that. What they want to know is
that
if
they're
they
covered.
have to take it back under power of sale or something, they're covered. If there's anything wrong, it has to get fixed.
Excellent. We've got to go to a break, and I thank you very much for giving us the background. We're going to meet one of your colleagues. We're going to meet Mark Weir, and he's going to join us, and we're going to ask him questions about scenarios, real-life scenarios that he may have on his plate today, and hopefully put some sort of real normal conversation around this. So we want to thank you very much for joining us on the show. Thanks for the background. We really appreciate having you on.
Thank you very much. We old lawyers have something to say too.
So stay with us. When we come back from the break, we'll continue the conversation around the importance of title insurance, and we'll be joined by Mark Weir from HMH Law Offices in Barrie.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we're fortunate enough today to have not one but two guests from HMH Law Offices in Barrie on Owen Street in Barrie, and now we're with Mark Weir.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming, Mark. And one thing I wanted to ask you right off the bat, and it ties into a question that came up listening to Doug in the first segment, and that is the fact that there's one policy for life with title insurance. But maybe you can go into a little more detail on that, because I know when you renew a mortgage, Well, you tell us how that works when you refinance.
Yeah. So really, when you're buying a title insurance policy, when you buy a house initially, you're putting a mortgage on. You're actually buying two policies. There's a homeowner's policy. That one will cover the homeowner for as long as they own the property.
Right.
And in certain instances, it can be transferable to a spouse or child down the road. There is also a lender's policy. And that's the one that will need to be renewed each time you refinance or renew your mortgage. If you've paid your mortgage off in full, you don't need the lender's policy anymore. You've got your homeowner's policy. It will continue to cover you. So the lender's policy gets renewed each time it is
reassigned to a different, who they're protecting, if it goes from one bank to another, for example.
Correct, yeah. If you're with one lender and you move over to another lender, they would want their own policy to cover them. It's usually more affordable, a little bit cheaper than the homeowner's policy because it doesn't last forever. And some institutions will just build it in and you won't even notice the fee. Some will add the fee on top of it.
So we talked about a lot of instances. We talked about sort of the history and the reason. And Doug even mentioned at first, when it first was introduced, he kind of challenged the concept of it, right? I'm doing my due diligence as a lawyer. That should suffice. In fact, it's probably more accurate in the moment. But again, this is an instance where technology has evolved. We're working at a different speed right now. You're getting things done quicker, and there's a blanket policy, and it only kicks in when the numbers say they have to, in terms of, the odds of there being a challenge. Let's talk about some of those specific challenges, though, that you deal with on a daily basis on why title is challenged or why protection is required for the homeowner, for example.
Right. Yeah. So under your homeowner's policy, there's around 35 different issues that would be covered, and your lender's policy covers a little bit fewer than that, 25 or so. But there are 3 or 4 situations that we see far more often than any of the others. A lot of the ones in the policy are very obscure and wouldn't arise. By far, the biggest volume, highest number of claims we see is to do with arrears of property taxes or water bill, or sometimes common expenses on a condominium, but that should have been caught on the review of the status certificate. Right. However,
and these are leaned against the title of the property.
So this is in the case of property taxes. Say you bought property, it's January 2020. You bought a property this week. 6 months from now, the municipality comes to you and says, this property never paid property taxes for 2019, 2018. That might add up to $6,000, $8,000. They're going after whoever owns the property right then, and they could put a lien against the property, which would affect your ability to convey title to another buyer. Now we have a title insurance issue.
So let's cover that just for 1 second.
Yes.
There are very few things that can trump priority of a first mortgagee versus a second mortgagee,
Correct.
et cetera.
Yep.
And that is the Queen or the government. And
The
it's
CRA
typically-
and condominium liens can trump that. But any lien on title is going to have to be
remedied
before you
rectified.
convey title to someone else. So if the city has liened your property, or if they've just come to you and said you owe this amount in taxes.
So through no fault of your own, you're the current homeowner. You
Exactly.
purchased it January 1st, 2020, but the people who owned it previously swore that they paid their taxes, and somebody forgot
didn't
to
say, yeah.
do the math and figure out that there was an outstanding balance, and now currently you're on the
Correct.
hook.
Yeah, and if the municipalities come to you and said you owe this, even if they haven't put a lien on yet, you can't sell that house to someone else without disclosing it, or it's fraud, because you know there is an issue that could affect title. So in that instance, we may initiate a title insurance claim, we may not. We can discuss that. I think we're going to discuss some remedies a little later on, how we would deal with arrears of property taxes. That is by far the most common. I think it's roughly around 60% of claims submitted have to do with property taxes. They are usually low dollar amount claims relative to what other types of claims there are. So another very common type of claim is unclosed work permits.
Oh, okay.
You move into the house, everything looks fine. City comes to you and said, sorry, did you have any? Oh, my apologies. City comes to you and says, hey, there's an unclosed work permit for the garage or for the foundation or for whatever. Right. You didn't know about it prior to closing. You didn't cause it to be open and not be closed. It was some previous owner that opened it, never had it inspected, and closed off. Well, the city, if they demand that you rectify it, we could have a title insurance issue. If there's no demand made, then there may be other remedies that title insurer can do. They may be able to insure over, but again, we can discuss that a little further down in remedies. So property taxes are the big one. Next is unclosed work permits. And then another one that is a common concern, but it doesn't actually show up too often, but it has people thinking, is mortgage fraud.
Right.
Okay.
Say you've paid off your mortgage, it's free and clear, there are no encumbrances on title. All of a sudden, there's a $200,000 mortgage on title that you never put on there.
And we do study it. We do hear about it. But go ahead, Mike.
No, I was going to ask, in addition to that, I mean, more and more condo products are being sold in this town. A lot of the new builds are condos. Are there incident-specific, perhaps special assessments that come into play, and is that covered in any sense?
Right. So special assessments and arrears of condo fees would also be covered. Typically, that, like I said, that should be caught by the lawyer when reviewing the status
Right,
certificate.
yeah.
We get it when we're buying a condo. We get a certificate that's prepared by the condominium corporation that says, here's what common elements fees are per month. There are or there are not arrears on that. There are or there are not any special assessments that have been coming down. So a special assessment would be, we need to replace the roof on the building. Every homeowner, every unit owner needs to put in X amount, $5,000, $10,000.
Now, if it's something that should have been caught during that closing process, if everyone was doing their due diligence, but it's not, can that be challenged by that?
I mean, if the information
Or, sorry,
was
by the insurance
available and had been provided, if the lawyer had a copy of the status certificate and missed a special assessment in
Not
there,
that would ever happen, but.
no, that would fall back on the lawyer. Title insurance is going to say you knew or ought to have known that there was
Okay.
an issue here.
So it's not a blanket, I'll get out of jail free card for everybody
No, if you
involved.
knew or ought to have known prior to closing that it was an issue, then title insurance is not going to cover it. And in that, there might be some questions you don't want to ask prior to closing.
Right.
Particularly about, are there open work permits on this property? Probably not a question you want to ask before closing, because if the homeowner says, yes, there are, well, now you've got to address those before. Because if the buyer assumes those risks, title insurance isn't going to cover it.
So let's talk about some of the difference between new builds versus resale. If you take a piece of agricultural land, formerly farmland, whatever it may be, and you put in a new development and new curbs go in and new driveways go in, and you assume there's some lot lines. I've got a 40-foot lot and I've got a 50-foot lot. It might actually be 39.6. It might be 40.24. You never quite know. Especially when you get tighter density, you could have, I imagine issues can come up, whether it's row housing or whatever. Is it more likely that you're going to have instances where a lot line or a lot boundary issue comes in, somebody's front steps actually are on the other person's property, or the corner of a garage is on somebody else's property? Is it more likely to happen in your experience on new builds or on older homes that have sort of formerly been land registry and now in land titles?
Right, and I haven't really seen a correlation between one or the other.
Okay.
The older ones where technology for surveying was a bit more out of date, and it goes from this rock to that, as I was alluding to earlier, it goes from this rock to this tree to that. Your measurements will be right off. The newer ones tend to have better technology, and it's you've got your corners and you know where your lot boundaries are. And a lot of them, they carve them up into nice little rectangles and fewer, oblong shapes that we see in a lot of older.
Got it. So listen, time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
Lots of great information and some good examples. Thank you for that. When we come back from the break, which we've got to go through right now, when we come back, let's talk about some of those remedies.
Perfect.
And just make sure that the sky isn't falling. There's always a solution, but we need every instance is going to dictate how that gets handled.
Exactly. Yeah.
So stick with us. We'll be back with Mark Weir from HMH Law Offices in Barrie on Owen Street right after this break. And welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we've had the pleasure of having Doug Hill as well as Mark Weir from HMH Law Offices in Barrie. Thanks for being with us here. In the first segment, we covered really the history and the importance of title insurance. In the second segment, we talked about some real-life examples and scenarios, and really the most prevalent instances where title insurance coverage comes in.
Right.
Let's talk now about the importance of remedies and probably the most important things that you want your clients to know in the overall process is?
In terms of remedies, it all starts with communication. Ideally, you'd have a solicitor review of the agreement of purchase and sale, and we know there's not always time for that with quick closings and conditions and all of that. Ideally, we would have a look at the agreement of purchase and sale and talk to the client before they firmed up on their deal, especially if they intend to change the use of the property. For instance, they want to put a pool in the backyard. They're like, oh yeah, we got lots of space, we can put the pool in. Maybe get a lawyer to have a quick pull of that abstract, have a look at the pin map. Oh, there's a 9-foot easement running across the back of that property. You're not going to be able to dig there and put a pool in.
Okay, so because it might be for Rogers Communications
Yeah,
or
it might
Bell,
be the
or
municipality,
it
it might be hydro lines, it might be whatever. That's not going to be a title insurance claim. They're not going to ensure your ability to do what you want with the property. Just can I sell the title to another person?
You might be getting an above ground instead of an in ground at
Potentially,
that point.
yeah.
Okay.
So communication beforehand, but also communication after. So I sit down with my clients when we're signing up the purchase documents. One of the forms that I have to go out, have them sign, and myself I sign, is explaining what title insurance is, why we're buying it, why we're recommending it, or why it's being required by the lender. And then I discuss with them typical things that can arise that would be a title insurance issue. I'm not saying that they will arise, but like I said, arrears of property taxes, the most common one, unclosed work permits, those types of things. And I tell them, if you do come across any of these issues or anything you think might be a title insurance claim, give me a call.
Yeah.
I'll have a look at it, I can review it before we send it into the title insurance company. For instance, on arrears of taxes, yes, putting in a title insurance claim and getting compensated by the title insurance company is a remedy. It's not my preferred remedy right off the bat. If at all possible, I'd love to go back to the previous owners, the sellers, and say, hey, did you own it during this time? We need to get that paid. Sometimes they'll say, put a title insurance claim in. What they might not realize is the title insurance company is going to pay out the person that bought it and then seek recovery after the person that sold it, and they may take them to court over it. So it saves everyone time and money to just deal with it internally if possible. Yes, title insurance is there. I like to treat it in that aspect sort of as an insurer of last resort if we can't resolve it, because like I said, 60% or around there of claims submitted are property tax arrears.
Yes.
But sorry, yes?
I want to throw a curveball
Yeah.
at you if you don't mind, and that is something that we didn't talk about. How does what you're discussing or what you're describing get impacted in the event that you're dealing with the estate of someone who's now deceased?
Right. Okay. So you're dealing with the estate of, so one thing to look out for in an agreement of purchase and sale is a blanket as is clause. That could be highly detrimental. A lot of people say, okay, I'm willing to take on the risk. I know that there's some work to be done as is, but they only scratch the surface. What if there's an unclosed work permit that you didn't know about? If you buy the property as is, then the title insurance company is going to assume that you have assumed all those risks and they're not going to cover it.
Very important. Read the words.
But, so if there is an as is, try to get it specific to the appliances are being sold as is, if that's really their only concern. Try not to have a whole blanket as is. However, if it is an estate sale or a power of sale, title insurance companies, they do understand the real estate industry, they understand the seller, likely doesn't have any firsthand knowledge of the
Good
property.
advice.
That as-is clause would not necessarily affect your title insurance policy.
good
So
advice.
title insurance does still
Really good
apply
advice.
in an estate sale.
Some other advice buried within what you said previously
Right.
is when you're buying that property, don't just be looking at what meets your criteria right then. It's look over the term you may own it, because if you do want to put the pool, if you do want to put that extension,
Exactly.
build a garage or extend a garage,
Yep.
then look at how title and everything is going to affect.
Well, one of the
your
things that we've
plans.
talked about on this show for 3 years is our goal for our audience is eyes wide open.
Yeah.
Right? We're not going to, it's not doom and gloom, and we're not going to talk about all the worst case scenarios, but this is a perfect example of, listen, it may never apply to you, but we don't want you to ever be in a position where you said, I didn't know.
Exactly.
No.
Yeah.
So-
So the more that you can communicate with your real estate agent, with your lawyer, with your mortgage broker, you can get all the information that you need to know that you're comfortable with the deal.
So we've talked for half an hour about something. There's probably hours and hours that you can talk about. I mean, you've built a career off of it.
Right.
Let's put it this way, right? But we've talked for half an hour about just a couple of examples and some history and some instances whereby the vast majority of people who are dealing with these transactions, thousands per day, don't ever bring up the topic about why they're paying for title insurance. And some people just say, well, it's an expense and I don't have the money in my back pocket. I'm just going to pay for the seemingly mandatory lender's policy. I'm
Right.
going to opt out of the homeowner's policy. In 1 minute or less, is there an example of a scenario where a client didn't have it and really could have used that policy that you're aware of?
That didn't have it and could have used it. Yeah.
I'm making you stretch.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I really only had, I can only think of one example where I've had a client tell me point blank, I do not want it, I'm not going to buy it. They were buying a property off of a family member and were planning to sell it within a matter of months. They didn't anticipate anything would arise. But had anything come up, they would have been on the hook for it unless they were able to get a policy that could insure over the issue that arose and convey it to the next buyer. So
Is this something you can buy later on after you already own the property?
you can get existing owners' policies. They are sometimes more difficult to get and often will have exclusions built into them. The underwriter is going to want to ask a heck of a lot more questions.
Sure. They're
and
wondering why
investigate.
suddenly you need this when you didn't want it.
Exactly,
That's
yeah.
something
And
else.
if it's just to protect yourself from mortgage fraud because now you're mortgage free, okay, they're probably not too concerned about that. But if you want to cover all of the work permit issues and you've owned the property for 30 years, they're going to be quite suspicious. Like, did you do some work in the 30 years?
We got 20 seconds left, and I'm
Yes.
going to jump in with one last quick question.
Yeah.
We used to tell our clients, even if you're mortgage free, it's a good idea to put a line of credit or some type of collateral mortgage on there. It protects you from someone else coming in, because it is easy to access. You can pull the title, the registry documents, see if there's no mortgage, and you can put one on there fraudulently. Does your title insurance cover that instead of having to put a mortgage on?
Right, so you've got that owner's policy you bought when you bought the property. It covers you for as long as you own the property. It would cover you for mortgage fraud. Mortgage fraud is quite difficult. I believe it's less than 5% of claims that the title insurance.
Mark, we got to go. HMH Law Offices in Barrie, Doug Hill, thank you very much. Mark,
Thank you for
very
having
much.
us.
Thank you.
Appreciate having you on the show.
Very good
We'll see you
information.
next time on Hitting Home with Mike and RF.